Welcome to another episode of DSLR Video Shooter. Today we're going to take a look and really talk about getting correct exposure on the GH4. So this is actually another section of the GH4 guide that I'm going to be showing you guys, and this is from chapter 2, which is all about filming. So we're going to talk about a couple different methods to get correct exposure using just the camera without really anything else but a cheap card. And then we're also going to talk about using some scopes, which might scare some people, but trust me, you will fall in love with scopes once you actually start using them. So good stuff. Let's go ahead and jump straight into the video. When it comes to exposure, there are several ways to go about it. I'm going to be talking about 3. And the first option, you don't need anything but a gray card, an 18% or middle gray card. So here's one. This is kind of a fancy one from Data Color. It's around 50 bucks, but don't worry, you can get one for around 10 bucks from Amazon. You can see that on this screen. I'm pointing this camera right at one. It's a nice collapsible one, and on the other side it's white, which is really handy. So we're going to be using that one, but this is a great option because it has colors on the other side, which is nice for matching cameras. And then on the gray side, we have gray, and we also have a gray scale at the bottom with white, black, and another 18% gray. So you'll need one of these to perform any of the following tests. And what we're trying to do is, using this card, we need to know what setting to use on the camera to get perfect exposure. And this setting is going to be getting good exposure for your skin, which is really, really important because we can't mess up skin tones, and we want to make sure we get that as close to correct as possible. So the first method we're going to be talking about is only using the card. We're not using any other tools. Now I have a monitor here just so you can see what I'm doing, and we'll talk about monitors and how to use their tools in a second. But you don't need anything but a gray card to kind of get a minimal way to check your exposure. So what I'm going to do is we are going to go into the camera menu, and we're going to go down to metering mode. We want that at the bottom setting. So this little one here with the little squares or brackets with the dot in the middle, that is spot metering. So what that means is once we select this and go back to our main screen, you see on the camera we have our little target square, and we can move it around. We use that to jump in. And what's cool is the middle of that is where it's going to check exposure. So right now I have it pointed at the gray card, and at the very bottom of the screen, it's kind of hard to see on this, but I'll have a blown up version for you guys. There is a little scale, and in the middle you have 0, then you have minus and plus. So I have found that with most of the lenses I've been testing, if you can point your camera at a gray card with spot metering, get the target right on the gray, you want this meter to be -1 or -2/3. So that first little square on the negative side of 0, or 3 ticks to the left of 0, is what I'm finding to be correct exposure for skin. So the idea is you point the camera in that little target at your gray section, your 18% gray, and if that is at -1 or -2/3, you should be gold for correct exposure on skin, human skin. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to work for absolutely every lens combination out there, so I encourage you to go ahead and do this yourself and experiment, do a bunch of tests, shoot at different settings, pull it onto your computer, and see how it all looks. After you've done that, you'll really get a feel for what the best setting is for your lens and camera configuration. Now do keep in mind, this is with the settings that I've been talking about through the course, especially in this chapter, chapter 2, using that modified natural photo style. So if you have a different setting on your camera, you're gonna need to play with this, and it's not gonna be the same here. So that's the first method, using nothing but a gray card. Now I wanna talk about using a waveform monitor and false color. So to do this, we're gonna use the monitor. Now, I have 2 options here. We'll look at each of them. I have a small HD DP7 Pro. This thing is a beast of a monitor. I love it to pieces. And then we have the Atomos Shogun. We'll look at each of these monitors and how we can check exposure with them. So first, let's take a look at the small HD. Now, what's cool about the small HD is there's these little touch sensitive or motion sensors next to these buttons. So I have 2 waveforms here. One I have set to just be on the lower part of the screen. The other I have to fill the whole screen. Now I can't get into everything about waveform monitors, that's a whole nother video, but I will tell you that you can't tell shapes looking at a waveform monitor. You can only tell exposure. you can see right here we have this perfectly white line. And as I change the camera's exposure here, you'll notice that all of this information changes. And that white line is actually our target here, our 18% gray card. Now you can't tell it's round. All you can see is the exposure. So up and down we have the actual exposure levels. They go from 0 to 100. And left to right is left to right on the screen. So we see right in the middle of the screen, we have this white line going straight across. That's our gray card. And if I go over here and shake it a little bit, hang on one second, you'll see that it moves around. Okay, so to use a waveform monitor, I have found with the GH4 using the natural settings that I've talked about, having the gray card at 40 on a waveform gives me correct exposure. So if I go ahead and try to change this again, right about there is going to give me correct exposure, because here's 40, there's a line that runs all the way across, and I have my gray card right in the middle. So with a waveform monitor, using the settings that I talked about, and most semi-flat settings, around 40 is where you're going to live. So this is a great way to check exposure. You just slap a gray card in your shot, make sure it's around 40, and you're good to go. Now let's go ahead and take a look at false color. False color is really essentially a waveform. The only difference is it reads differently. So here we actually have a number scale, so we can see with a number value where everything lands, but we can't really tell where it is and what shape it is. If I had a bunch of stuff in this shot, it would be impossible to isolate different faces and different elements. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the waveform monitor off, and I'm gonna go over and turn on false color. So now you see all these different colors on the screen, and it's hard to see, but at the very bottom, there is a scale. So this particular monitor reads it out a little differently than others. It starts at purple, then blue, then it slowly turns to a lighter gray. Then we get green, more gray, magenta, and then more gray up to white, and then we have a yellow and a red. So at the high end here, on the right side of the screen, is blown out. This silk here is completely blown out. It's almost at 100. We see green is at 38 to 42. So that's actually right in our sweet spot range. We want 40, so if we have it in the green, it's about right. So on this screen, we can see that we're pretty much perfect. We have a little bit of green, and it's right around that gray and the green area, so we're probably just fine. So if you have a complex shot, it's a lot easier to use something like a false color monitor. But personally, I prefer waveforms because it's a lot more accurate, and usually I can find the gray card in the shot, and I just prefer it, but that's just me. Other people have different opinions. So now that we've seen it on the small HD monitor, let's go ahead and take a look at the Shogun. So now I have the Shogun monitor powered up, and this is a beautiful monitor. It is not nearly as well built as the small HD, but then again, it is a 4K recorder, which is pretty cool. And we'll be talking about it here in a little bit and talking about 4K recording. But we're here to take a look at waveforms and false color. So on this monitor, you hit this little icon here, and here we can turn on our waveform. So there it is. I'm gonna turn this back off. So here we have a waveform just like we did on the small HD. This one looks a little different, but it's the same concept. And again, we can see our white line right here on the screen. So if I go ahead and change my exposure a little bit, you'll see everything move around, and we want it right there. So hovering around 40. And now we know we have good exposure for skin. So very simple tool. As you can see, when you have your gray card evenly lit, it's very easy to find on the screen as a perfectly solid line. That is waveforms. Let's go ahead and turn this off. And let's go on this little target button here. And I'm gonna turn on false color. So here we have false color. Again, same thing as the other monitor. Bunch of colors, and each color is assigned on a scale of 0 to 100. So this one, we have the scale on the side of the monitor. So red is completely blown out, orange is right behind it, then yellow, so we can see our silk here is pretty much completely blown out. It's near the very top. And if we head down here, we see that green and gray are correct exposure. We're pretty good here on our gray card. Obviously, I don't have perfect exposure and an evenly lit gray card, so it's a little off. But again, that's gonna be the human face. You're not gonna have, unless you have terrible lighting, you're not gonna have a completely same exposure level face. You're gonna have some variation. So those are three of my favorite ways to check exposure on the GH4. To recap, we looked at using spot metering with the camera. All you need is the gray card. Then we looked at using a waveform monitor to check exposure as well as false color. So there you go, a couple ways to check exposure on the GH4. If you enjoyed this video, definitely check out the GH4 guide. You can watch the trailer below this video, and it has 4 hours of GH4 content specifically designed for shooters. Doesn't matter what you shoot. If you shoot documentary, corporate, dramatic, film, music videos, any of that stuff, this guide is going to be a huge resource for you. So check it out, and I will see you guys in the next video.